Hey friends, it's me, Fawn Ellebrook, here to welcome you to another episode of What Matters Most with Faith Community. This one is really special and practical. Our kids director, Misty Moore, sat down with two amazing parents to learn from their wisdom and years of experience raising a family. Bryant and Becky Wright have a really wide range of perspective to share as they've both been teachers for many years and have two awesome adult children. Now, I'm not a parent, except for the cutest pup you've ever met named Pepe, but even so, this conversation was really encouraging and insightful. Whether you're parenting with your spouse or you're a rock star single or co-parent, I hope you enjoy listening in on this chat. Let's dive in.
Miss Becky, how was your day today?
My day today was good. It was a good day. It was a rewarding day today.
Oh, good, because you teach first graders.
I teach first graders, yes. So
Rewarding
my experience
is good.
with this kind of stuff comes not just from being a parent, but also a teacher of young ones.
Yes. How long have you been teaching first grade?
20 years. This is my 21st year.
Yay, congratulations. You guys have all this experience.
Yeah.
Bryant, how was your day?
It was a pretty decent day. I was pretty hectic. I had a lab with freshmen, and we were using heat, and we were using glassware. So
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, safety factors, plus the idea that some kids want to see what Cheetos look like on a hot plate. So you got
And you put their freshmen in the mix.
Yeah.
the freshmen. So
And you have been teaching for 29 years?
29 years.
That is amazing. And 29 years coaching track.
Yeah, actually, cross country, I've been the head coach for 20 years. So
That's amazing. And I don't know if this is going to be part of the podcast, Bryant, but congratulations, because you just accomplished something pretty great, right?
we set the state record for the most consecutive wins in the state Class 4 cross country championships, and actually, all classes we won 8 in a row. So
Nice. Congratulations.
thank you.
Well, my name is Misty. I am the Faith Kids Director at Faith Community Church. I have two kiddos. Gavin is 11 and Gracie's 8. But I have some amazing people here with me today, Becky and Bryant Wright. Why don't y'all talk a little bit about your family, what you do?
My name is Bryant Wright. I've been a teacher for 29 years. I've coached for almost that long. I've been married to Becky for almost 30 years, and we have 2 children. Both of those children are in their 20s, and we have 1 grandchildren, and that cow is about 7 months old now.
And completely adorable.
Thank you.
All right, Becky, how about you?
My name is Becky. I have been an elementary teacher for 20 years. He's told you about our children already. We are extremely proud of them. Lydia is a teacher. Isaac is a nurse, and they are both we're really proud of them. They're doing amazing things.
That's so awesome. Well, since you've established that your kiddos are in their 20s and they have careers and all of those amazing things, give us just a kind of an idea of what it was like to raise a family for that long. I have an 8 and an 11-year-old, so I can say a little bit, but y'all have, 20 plus years of experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Lydia is 26 years old now, and so when Becky became pregnant, we also had just started our careers. I'd started my career as a teacher. We had our first mortgage at the time, and I was also starting my master's degree. And at that point, we really wanted to have Becky to stay at home for a little while. So these are all things that we were concerned about, and we were starting by. I would mention that even before we had children, we prayed for our children, and prayed for who their spouse would be, and prayed that God would bless them, and we would even pray for them when they were in the womb. And I think that's all a very important plan that people should consider when they're getting ready to have families.
That's amazing.
Yeah, making that commitment ahead of time and being very intentional about it beforehand.
That's
is very
awesome.
impactful.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question or thought here. But what do you think it's like? Like, what would be a healthy family or parenting style? And healthy, but doable as well for the average Joe over here with an 8-year-old and 11-year-old. How do I parent them into their teen years?
Well, we had some major priorities that we had. First of all, I think that before we get into that, I hope you don't mind, but before we get into that, I think it's important for each individual to consider why they want to be parents. First of all, I think it's important that parents get together and maybe separately write down what are the advantages of having children, what are the disadvantages of having children, what problems could we foresee, and will these problems be too hard for our marriage? Because, you know, as a married couple, that should be your number one priority. We believe, that you stay married for your life. So, these are some things that you need to consider even before you even consider to have children, to make sure that that your relationship stays healthy. Not that you won't have some problems along the way,
Sure.
but you need to consider those, and also you need to consider a few things like, if your parenting is not a good situation, as your children become older, all children are a gift from God, but they can be either a major blessing for you or a major burden, and that is something that will be with you for the rest of your life, or it should be, as their parents. So, these are some things I think you should consider. And also another thing that we've talked about is we think it's very important. Anything that you do in life, your job or what you want to be or who you are, most people will spend a lot of time, learning about their craft or going to school or going to college. And so they become prepared for that. But unfortunately, we see that most people, they don't read anything about a good marriage. They don't they don't read. They don't try to develop themselves as parents before they become parents, or they don't do any reading or any counseling with anybody about, each stage of the life of the children. And so as a consequence, one of the besides, becoming a Christian and having God as your Savior, and then number two, you get married, which is a very important part of your life. Then, you have your children. So you have people that don't fully understand how to be a parent because they've never trained themselves for that. And so then some people, what they might do is they might say, well, I had a horrible a life growing up as a child, and I didn't like the way my parents did anything. But if you don't train yourself,
Sure.
you will fall back on those situations, and you'll do the same things that your parents did that you
Right.
thought were not good. And so we think that that's one of the major things that you need to think about before having children. But if you already have children, we think that one of the number one priorities we had was we always went to church. Always went to church.
Yeah.
And we were together as a family. So that's a big thing. So you do that as a family, even if your children, you don't really give them, an option. That's what we are going to do. We're going to go to church. Another important thing we did that we think helped was, we always ate supper together. Always ate supper. Now, some people, maybe they can't eat supper together, but what that was is, that was the quality time that we had with them, where we communicate with our children, where we sat down and nothing else mattered but, nourishment to our body and nourishment to each other on how to make ourselves better people and communicate with what's going on, the joys in our lives, maybe some of the struggles during our lives. And we kind of would set things aside, and we would not argue about things, but we would enjoy each other. And I think sometimes that's one of the most important things is enjoyment of each other, and not, as a parent, a time where you sit down and you're telling your children what they're not doing right or what they need to do right, but the time where you can just have enjoyment. So I think that's an important part.
I feel like if I could sum all that up, you're saying be intentional parents from the beginning if possible, but wherever you find yourself along the way. It made me think of we try to sit down as often as possible for dinner, and if it's not dinner, sometime during the day, whether it's a meal or not. And it's Mondays with Mommy, and we each have to go around the table and do our high and our low for the day. And Tuesdays with Timmy, since there's not a day of the week that starts with D, so we just went with his first name. And he does, what have you learned today? So, and little things like that seems like not a big deal, but when they're in their 20s or they're having their own kids, they're like, do you remember when I was a kid? I want to do that too. Like you're saying, it doesn't have to be a huge event. It's the fact that you're sitting down and spending that time with your family and saying you're important. This time right here is important.
Exactly. Establishing those traditions is really, really important, yes.
Okay, well, in this crazy world we find ourselves in, how would you guys say we can help our kids discern the difference between right or wrong when it keeps moving?
Yeah, we talked about that because it is difficult when you live in a culture that doesn't have a black and white anymore. There are very few things overall that seem like they're always right or always wrong in our culture. And so how do you help kids, whether they're little, 3, or they're 13, or they're 18 years old, how do you help them know what to do? For me, what I do with my young ones at school is I get them to consider, how does what you've done impact other people? So it could be something as simple as I pushed somebody down, or I took a toy that didn't belong to me. It's just asking them to think about, how does it impact the people around me? If culture isn't going to tell me what's right or what's wrong, how do I determine that myself? And that's one that I use a lot with my students is, how does it impact the people that I'm around? How do they feel about it?
That's awesome. Yeah, I would say something that we're doing at my house is the one thing that doesn't change are the principles we learn in the Bible, right?
Exactly.
Right or wrong, the foundation of God's word doesn't change. Now, that is not going to be maybe a popular thing that they're going to hear, right? But it's important that they hear it from their parents in those times around the table or when they're just having a rough time. Those are usually the big moments that comes up. But that doesn't change no matter what their friends say, their teachers say, the people they work with say,
Exactly.
As they grow, that doesn't change. That we should be kind to everyone because they are all made by God doesn't change no matter what that person does to you, right?
Exactly.
That's a hard one.
It is. And that's our format, too, is that the Bible and what it says was the key place for us to go to look for guidance and direction. But for those families that maybe that isn't their direction they're coming from or their place to seek for guidance and wisdom, I feel like asking them to think about, what have I done and how does it impact, or how do other people feel about it? What has it done to somebody else?
Absolutely. That makes me think, for someone who maybe they are Christians or maybe they're not, and saying, oh, we find those, principles from the Bible. That sounds probably completely foreign to them. Do you guys have any tips for someone like that? How do they go to the Bible and find those things?
Well, I think, the golden rule is a huge factor. Treat others as you would want to be treated. I mean, that's the guideline that, if you followed that guideline, that would be a really great guideline. And, I was just talking with Becky. There's a guy by the name of Jordan Peterson who says he's not a Christian, and yet he follows the principles that
sure
the
does.
Bible set up. And so if you find those principles and you use the golden rule as the basis, treat others as you want to be treated, I think that's a huge step in the right direction. And a quote that I use frequently, even on myself, basically says if your life is based on principles, most questions you have will already be answered. So if something happens in your life and you're like, well, should I do that or should I not do that? Well, in your gut, if you set your principles up, you know if it's right or wrong. Now, are you going to follow that because you've made those principles in your life? And so, I think if you look at the Beatitudes is another amazing place that you can see some great things. And even, the Ten Commandments, if you even followed what the Ten Commandments say, those have never gone out of date.
Right.
So
That's awesome. It makes me think this is similar, but my kids during 2020, we were home a lot. And so there were days where I was like, y'all are losing your mind and you're going to make me lose my mind. And you're not really behaving the way we have been bringing you up to behave, right? So I had them each pick 5 words and we put it on a little sticky on the refrigerator. I said, what are 5 things that you want your friends or other adults in your life to think about you in simple interactions or when they're really getting to know you? So they each wrote 5 things. They're, humor, kindness, humility, they each had their own thing. And in moments where they are losing their minds, we go back to the list. Is your behavior reflecting any of these words right now?
right,
And
that's great.
It's not always easy.
Exactly. We were talking about that when we were discussing this, and how when you're determining what your pattern for discipline will be, or how do you model your children to be the kind of people you want them to be. That was the key thing that we talked about, is from the very beginning, even when Bryant was mentioning about things to consider from the start, maybe even before they're born, is to think about what are the qualities that you want your children to have as adults. Do you want them to have integrity? Do you want them to be honest, to have stamina, to have perseverance? If you want those things for them, you need to think about that ahead of time and then take action for them to demonstrate it. And the greatest way to do that we discussed was just to model it for them all the time. If you want them to be honest individuals, then they need to see you being honest.
Sure.
Not even in the white lies, not even those.
Right.
Whatever it is that you want them to be as adults, start to prepare them for that even when they're little, especially when they're little, because that will start to frame and form them into the people they will become.
That's amazing. So you touched on discipline a little bit there. There are, I'm sure, a lot of ideas out there, and a lot of parents are doing their own thing, but our kids are so unique and different.
Yes.
Personally, Gavin, my son, responds better to positive reinforcement, and my daughter, the even possible idea of a consequence is, scares her. So they're very different, obviously, but do you guys have any thoughts on discipline and how to do it well when, let's be honest, our kids are not cookie cutters, right? They're very different and unique.
Do you want to begin?
So what we always felt was we wanted to be more proactive in what happened. So, for example, there's a lot of research out there that says that, your kids are going to be formed significantly by the age of 4. And so, it's all about not giving in to your children, outlasting them in many situations, and letting them know that, hey, this is serious to us, and we mean business when we say do this or don't do this. And so, that was very important. And so, if you can establish those types of disciplines early, then you won't have as much problem later. So what you want to do is you want to establish the guidelines, and then you don't want your kids to do things that are going to get them in trouble. And so then if you can try and do that, then you don't have to worry about the consequences as much. So that's a little bit different way of thinking, but I think it's important that you do that. I think one of the things that we did with our children a lot is, a lot of decisions that we had, God was always in the center of it, and we prayed about it. Even though it might be a small decision, we think in our minds, it could be a huge decision in our children's mind. And just going, to God with those situations is a very important aspect. And we also felt like, okay, when we go places and there's new experiences for them, we would explain to them, okay, we're going here, and this is what we expect from you, and this is kind of what's going to happen while you're there. And these situations may come up, and these are the ways we want you to handle them. But that still gives them a little bit of flexibility to have fun, but they know this is what we're expecting of them, and if they don't follow that expectation, then they know they will be disciplined. And so we thought that was an important part of their younger childhood development.
I think that we mentioned it starting at the very, very youngest is very key. Having clear, consistent expectations that you model and demonstrate from the very beginning. The Bible talks about discipline, and discipline reflects a genuine love. So when you're disciplined, it's not a punishment. You're reflecting love and concern and value to people when you are disciplining them. It's not a punishment. There's a big difference between punishment and discipline.
That's amazing. I love that because it takes a little bit of the pressure off when you're thinking, I have to punish them for this. And sometimes I think it gets away with people because they start to feel guilty. I'm always punishing them,
Right.
So we can turn the tables even with them. Hey, this is for you because I want better for you.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's where, again, we said those qualities that you want them to have when they're adults, that's what those play in to those expectations from the very beginning.
And I would encourage, absolutely, before you become a parent or you have little ones, please be soaking all this Becky and Bryant wisdom up. But I think we can start it at any point, right?
Absolutely.
Earlier would be easier, right?
Right.
But you have a 8-year-old, a teenager, and you're not sure what to do. These are great principles to start now, so that you can, make things a little smoother along the way.
Exactly. And they're foundational. So no matter what discipline strategy you choose, you still can come back to these are the things that I want my child to be and look like and act like.
Definitely.
As they grow.
Well, that makes me think too. So if you're telling them this discipline is for you, how do you get there? How do they trust you? How do they know that that's true? Would you guys have any tips on how to build trust with your kids?
Well, I think, if you're honest with them in everything you do, that will build the biggest trust. But also going to your question about, so a lot of times if the kid does something wrong and you've already explained to them, you basically were proactive, and there's consequences to that, then that punishment isn't really coming from you. They chose that. They chose that consequence because you said, if you do this, this will happen. Well, then what has happened here is they actually, you let them know, hey, you are the one that chose this. So that's why now you have this consequence. And so it's not like you are the bad guy. Right. They are the ones that basically said, I would rather have this as a consequence because I did this.
And in turn, you're building trust because you're following through and showing them that the path you laid out for them, you weren't making it up. You weren't lying. Right. You weren't, trying to fumble it along the way. You said this was the path, or these are the paths to choose from, right? And this is what happens.
I also think you become someone that's trustable, trustworthy when you model the very things you're asking them to do. If you're saying that we want you to be honest, or we want you to have integrity or perseverance or whatever it be, that if you model those things, then that builds a trust factor also. And the times when you're honest, even when it's not easy and they know it.
Right.
And also, I think, as far as the trust, I think it's very important that your children know that you believe in them. Not just that you like them, that they're good, you think they're good people, but you actually believe in them. And there's a difference between between liking someone or saying, hey, you're a good person, and actually
valuing them.
believing in them or valuing them. There's a difference in believe, and people know that difference, and that would develop trust. I think another thing that some people do that's not good for their children is they say things about them, and then that becomes reality. Like if you say you introduce your child and they don't act like you think, well, my child's very awkward. Well, now what you've done is you've told your child they're awkward, and so now they'll become awkward instead of like going afterwards saying, hey, that's not the way, when we introduce you to somebody, that's not the way you react. This is how you should react, instead of saying that they're awkward just, to try and break the ice.
Right.
Or, my child's shy. Well, then your child's going to be shy. So if you try and work with them with those things, and then you show them that you believe in them, then there's going to be a huge trust that's developed between you and them.
For sure. I think too, them knowing the difference between healthy discipline. I mean, there is obviously a difference, and we know it. So I'm just putting it out there. When we talk about disciplining our kids and our kids being able to trust us, we're talking about the healthy kind, and unfortunately, not all kids get to experience that. But I think it's so important that we just continue to be intentional. I feel like all of this keeps coming back to we're just being intentional with our kids, right? And I love what you said about not saying things about your kids because they can come true, right? So my son is shy. You can't see me, but I'm, have the finger quotes going. But so he would use it as an excuse to not respond to someone when they would say hello. And I would be like, but that's not being shy, that's being rude. So here are the options for a shy person when they need to say hello. If you don't want to say it, then you need to wave it. We can give them options.
Absolutely.
We can help them out too, right?
Right, yeah. And another aspect I kind of wanted to add to that about gaining a trust from your children is be the same wherever you go. Yeah. Don't be one person when you're at work and then your children come and see you there, or when you're at a church, or maybe when you're out at the store or at home. Be the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't try and be someone you're not in front of people you're trying to impress.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I would add to that too. I don't know about y'all, but I don't get it right all the time. Right. And so
Exactly.
I found how important it is. It's so interesting how kids at a really young age will not want to say they're sorry or apologize. And so I'm like, man, I have to model that.
Exactly.
Right. I don't particularly enjoy it sometimes either.
Right.
But, when you get it wrong and you're like, that's not who I am, or that's not how I should have handled that. It's okay. It's not only is it okay, it's really important that apologize to them. Ask for forgiveness even, like, I'm so sorry I did that. That was not a good call. Talk it through. That's the other thing. I think that we need to remember that children are just little us's, right? Exactly. They're little people. We don't have to treat them like a separate thing. Yeah. They have all the same thoughts and emotions that we do, generally speaking. They just come out a lot different. Exactly. As we get older, we're more embarrassed. So we're not throwing the fits, right?
Yes, and I think that's a big thing that you mentioned there, is being able to tell them you're sorry and that, we didn't handle the situation the correct way. And I think that builds a trust, because then they know that you're willing to show that, hey, I mess up too, and so I'm sorry, and we're trying to do the best we can, and we just want you to do the best you can.
I can remember a time when we had an experience where we made a mistake and we had to confess it and we had to admit it and talk about it with our kids. And then a time in the future, they confessed that they were much more willing to come to us and admit a mistake because they saw us do it with them.
That's fantastic.
And the big thing about that is, I think that a lot of people have a misconception. Don't try to be a perfect parent, because if you try and be a perfect parent, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Absolutely.
And
It doesn't
and-
exist, right?
Right, and then that confuses a lot of things. So, realize that, you do the best you can. I know one of the things that I have done many times in my life is I go to James and, it says, if anyone lacks wisdom, ask. And I've done that. I do that all the time.
Me too.
And so, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It makes me think my as a child, you see your parents and you're like, well, they're parents. Like they're not real people, right? So you have this idea of what they should be like, or they should do this, they shouldn't do that. And as an adult, I'm like, yeah, my mom was just like a person trying to do her thing, right? And so I think it's important that we talk to our kids like, I'm your mom, but I'm also just like Misty.
Yeah.
And I've never had an 11-year-old before. So can we figure this out? I think it's important to get their input,
Absolutely.
because sometimes I think we're going down one road and we are not going down that road.
Right.
And we have to circle back, right? And I think that I'm curious what y'all think. How do you know when it's time to talk with your kids about more serious topics?
Yeah, well, kind of what you mentioned there, like, for example, a lot of times that's part of the communication. You say, okay, what's going on? What's the deal? Because, like you said, as an adult, you look at things a little differently. I mean, I try to think, okay, what would I have thought when I was this age? How would I do that? But sometimes that's a while back, and it's kind of hard to remember. So, what you do is you ask their input, and you might be thinking one thing, and they might be thinking another thing, and all of a sudden, you were getting ready to nail them for something, and you're like, oh, that's not even what was going on here.
that wasn't
And
the
so,
intent,
that wasn't the intent. And you might feel really relieved that you didn't have to, discipline them because you were going down a different road than they were.
Right.
So.
Well, you mentioned the being a few years. It makes me think too. Sometimes I assume that my children's childhoods are similar to mine.
Right.
And the thing is, it's not.
Right.
I am not very old, but they think I am. And the world just looks a little bit different. I think it's important to be like, hey, what was your day like today? What kinds of things are you dealing with? And not be afraid. I know some people say, don't bring it up because then you're starting it. What if they didn't already know, right? But if you're having those regular around the table conversations, I think bedtime's another really good one, right? Although I have a question for you guys. So my son's 11 and he doesn't want to be put to bed anymore, right? So at the appointed time, he just comes and tells me good night. We pray and he goes to bed. So we don't get the bedtime conversations anymore. So as your kids got older, how did you handle that?
I think in the car times,
true.
Because you have a distance to drive from church to
Yes.
home, you can be really intentional about those times. Times that that you have their attention and it's pretty much just the two of you.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is true.
Well, and to add to what she said, when my children went to the high school where I worked, so I would drive them to school for a significant amount of that time. Well, what I used to do with my son was I would play the New Testament because I'm like, he's probably not reading the Bible because most teenagers don't.
Sure.
So we would listen to the audio of the New Testament, and so he got a little bit then. I mean, he had some pretty good naps too while we were doing it, but it was something that he got to experience.
Yeah, take advantage of every moment, right?
Right.
I was going to say that you were talking about how do you decide when to have those conversations, and there's going to be a lot of times where you just have to deal with things when they happen. We were talking about things like if you have to discuss suicide, or you have to discuss a death in the family, or the big sex talk, or those kind of things. You definitely have to be intentional about those. But there's going to be times where unexpectedly you just have to talk about it as it comes, and that's when the praying for wisdom part becomes really important. And I will promise you that God has always been faithful, and he has always done it. And I'll put a plug in that when you read your Bible and you study it more, he's able to use that to speak wisdom to you even more clearly.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, as a plug to this podcast, you got to surround yourself with people who are a little further down the road with you. At least sometimes, right? You need somebody that can go, this is happening. What do I do, right? We don't have to have all the answers, which is a huge relief to me.
And that's a big deal, too, because at some point in time there may be your kid may ask you, or your child may ask you a question and say, what's going on here? And you're like, oh, I don't know exactly what I should do. Well, you can always say, hey, I can get back with you. And maybe you can read up on something or talk with somebody and get information on what you should talk about or discuss, because maybe you don't have all the answers, or maybe you're not equipped as even as a parent to answer those questions. So but don't wait too long to get back to them, because if you wait too long, they'll find out from somewhere else, and that may not be where you want it to come from. And sometimes you might have to just say, hey, at this point in your life, this is something that we're not going to discuss. I can give you a little bit of information, but we think you need to wait till you're a little older.
Sure. And I found it really helpful that my kids understand it's okay for them or for me to say, I don't know. I don't know right now. Let's find out together, or let's go talk to somebody together, or whatever. But not giving them the time to find out from sources I may not prefer. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about all the hard stuff. Well, some hard stuff, right? Or deep stuff. Being intentional in any part of our lives is difficult, right? But what has been your favorite season of being a parent?
Actually, for us, it's all been, for me, I think we've talked about this, it was always really pretty cool. It wasn't always easy, but it's always been amazing. And I think the strategies that we had to be intentional and to plan and to prepare has just made it not easy, but amazing in a lot of ways.
More doable.
Yeah, God gets all the credit, all the praise for it, because he's set us up for so much success.
I think she probably enjoyed the children more when they were younger, because that's kind of what she's set up for. And when they were at high school age, there was things that she would come up to me and say, whoa, wait a second. I said, nope, they're teenagers now, so no, we're not going to do that. You're going to have to back off a little bit on them. And because I knew them as teenagers, and that's who I work with, so I enjoyed them a significant amount there. But we also mentioned that we one of the seasons that's enjoyable now is where our children are now, because we see what God's doing to use them as great people, and they're very well liked. And that your children can be a gift from God, but you can give them back as a gift to society, as an enjoyment for others, or kids that are enjoyment. And I think one of the things that is a great thing to think about is like when you have your kids out in public, you want them to be a joy for others around you. So when people come up and say, hey, we enjoyed watching your children, they were very respectful, we enjoyed watching the interaction between you and your children. I mean, that's a blessing from God, but you can also bless other people, and that can be a way that you can talk to them about being a Christian, and why are your kids so good? Well, you can explain to them about how you raise them up in Christian principles and things like that.
That's awesome. I would have to agree with Becky. I felt like the younger years, there was just something magical about it, right? And probably because mommy is the center of their world, right? Yeah. So, that's kind of nice. But I also agree that, it's pretty amazing, whether it's hard or not, to watch them really become their own people, right? You're like, wow, that's really amazing. And you can start to pick out some of those unique qualities that were clearly given to them by God. And that makes it all worth it, even though it's so not easy. I have a quote on my wall at home right now that says, life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. And so being able to enjoy those moments that are not easy, but you can still go, we are doing this together.
Absolutely.
And I'm watching this amazing story unfold, right? As you continue to get to, watch your kiddos and their lives unfold with grandkids and all that fun. That's so exciting.
Right.
I was for sure y'all were going to say, now is our favorite time because we have a grandbaby. I was just waiting for
it. It's interesting because we've talked before, and I said I think sometimes having adult children is a little bit harder because you have to be hands off now. And when they're younger, you say, this is what I expect, and this is what I think, and this is what we're going to do, and that's what we do. And now we just kind of have to, pray about it and take our hands off and watch them.
Okay, so what you're saying is it does not get easier? Is that what you're... I'm teasing.
It does. I mean, it's very rewarding when you see them become people that are a good contribution to society.
I tell my son that all the time. He's like, why do I have to do that? I'm like, because I need you to be a productive person in our society, okay?
Yeah. We used to tell our kids we want people to be glad when we come, not glad when we leave.
Yes, that is preferable for sure. We all have our moments, but that is definitely the preference. Okay, so we're talking about the good and the bad and all of the thought and heart that goes into it. But how do y'all stay sane as parents? And you mentioned earlier, Bryant, the obvious and really important relationship as a married couple as well.
Yeah. Feel free to go first. I think what you need to do, whether you are a married couple or you are in this adventure single, consider who your support system is and your support team, and go to them when you need help, when you need a break, when you need advice or guidance or time. That helps a lot. For us, I think the biggest focus was, and we were going to say it probably a million times, is having God at the focus. That is the absolute, Him being our source is what kept us on track. Being in agreement about things regardless. We would talk a lot about, we always needed to be on the same page about what we were doing. And if our marriage relationship is nurtured and it's valued, then the parent-child relationship goes hand in hand with that. If it's not, then it suffers tremendously.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we've done well is we've communicated well with each other. I think sometimes that people think, well, that's not worth talking about, or maybe my spouse knows that, but you'd be surprised at things you bring up that you think is a given. That's not. And so being able to communicate little things and be willing to, respect your spouse's experiences. Like, I came from a family where my mom and dad were married, and they are still married my whole life, over 50 years. And Becky came from a broken home, so her experiences were different than my experiences. So we had to bring those together, and we had to communicate those together. But whatever we did, we had to realize that our main goal was to remain married, and realize that the most important thing we can do is to have a good marriage, because we know that children that come from homes that aren't broken homes, and I mean, some people right now, you may be a single parent, but if you're not at that point, if you can nurture those relationships with your partner, those are going to be a major goal for you, and it is show for your children, and that is what they need. Also, we know that in parenting that there's going to be some sacrifices that you have to make, and so you're going to have to be willing to make some sacrifices in order to make sure that your relationship as a married couple doesn't suffer. And I would say that there will be times that your marriage will suffer some, but that's because you do have a responsibility to your children, but you don't let it suffer for very long. And you talk about that suffering, and you communicate on how you can get back on the right on the right track, and
find that balance,
and making sure that balance is there.
Yeah, that's awesome. It makes me think, circling back to being an example, right? Because if we want our kids to move on into healthy relationships, we have to show them what that looks like, right? So we've talked quite a bit about how to do this thing, and naturally for you guys, we're talking about, how to do it when you have a team, right? A spouse or a partner to do it with. But some people don't find themselves in that situation. So we have single moms, single dads, or other family members who are raising, kiddos on their own. So do you have any encouragement for them? Because it's not going to, apply the same way. So you have any encouragement for them?
Yeah, I would say I would encourage them that they realize that, as a Christian, you're not alone, because God is there with you, and He respects what you're trying to do with your child to teach them the ways of God. And so I would not compare yourself to anyone else. I know that a lot of people say these people or this person was the perfect parent. Well, when you don't compare yourself to them, compare yourself to be the best that you can be. And I think that will help you out in your endeavors, because once you start comparing yourself to someone else, you don't know their situation, and you're setting yourself up for failure at that point. So it's important that you try to be the best version that you can of yourself, knowing full well that you're not doing it by yourself, you're doing it with God. And sometimes God seems to be such an abstract idea for many people, but in reality, if you're reading your Bible, if you're praying, if you're asking for wisdom, He's going to be there with you in ways that you don't fully understand. And I also think that you have to realize that although it may be just you and your child or your children, you have a different relationship than possibly if you had a spouse. But you have to realize that you have to be their parent and not their friend, and so that you are going to have to do some disciplining that you wouldn't do if they were your friend. So you have to keep that in mind.
I come from a broken household. My father left when I was 5 years old, so the primary portion of my life was a mom in charge, and her having to make decisions and take action all by herself. And so
with 3 children.
With three of us.
That's amazing.
And so she also had another obstacle. Her family was across the ocean in another country. Oh, wow. She moved here with my dad and didn't have any contact. There was no team for her. There was no support system for her. And so watching her now, thinking about it now, she did such an amazing job. But the key important thing was that her family was provided for. And she got to places sometimes, and you may get to places sometimes where you really need help. And it's hard to ask. It's embarrassing, and it's humble, and it's difficult to ask. But I encourage you, ask for help. Think of who you can use, resources to find who can help you with. Maybe you need counseling. Maybe you need help with how to have food on the table. I can remember those times. Mom got to a place where she realized that taking care of us was the most important thing, and it didn't matter what anybody else thought. And you might need to come to that place where knowing that caring for your family is the most important thing, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Hopefully you have individuals in your life that you can seek out to help you with that. If you're like my mom, she just went and she made phone calls and she knocked on doors and she made friends, and she became brave and bold to do that. And it was not easy for her to do that. I know now that might be a little easier because you have resources like these podcasts, or you have the internet where you can go and seek help. You can look for the things you're seeking for and get direction on places to go or people to ask. So I would encourage you to take advantage of those kind of things. If you have strong-willed children and you need help with that, there's great resources. There's all kinds of videos, there's podcasts, there's radio programs, there's all sorts of resources that I've recommended to other young adults that are in a situation where they're doing it on their own and struggling. So check out those resources. And as my husband said, I really recommend that you ask God to come alongside you and let him be your support system. That is the wisest choice you can make.
Okay, so looking back, what would you tell yourself with a baby and a 2-year-old, a younger parent version of yourself? Could you give any advice?
My advice is to realize that it is not going to be easy. There's no guarantee that it would be, but you will see the fruits of it all in your endeavors if you don't give up. Don't give in, especially when it's hard. You have a tremendous responsibility, but also with that comes this also tremendous opportunity to have an amazing impact on your children and their children and their children.
That's amazing. No pressure. Just teasing.
So you have to realize that the lessons that your children are learning will shape them. And you have to be there to comfort them and also to correct them. And not everything in their life is going to go easy. And that's okay. And sometimes you're going to learn more from those. But, as a parent, sometimes we don't want our kids to get upset. We don't want them to, let's say, lose the game or whatever. But we should know that that's going to happen in life, and they need to be prepared for that. And so when those situations happen, you need to be there to walk them through those. And so that these struggles they're going to be necessary. They're going to be there. And so you just try and use those to shape them to the outcome you want them to be. And that goes back to the things, your goals for your children when they're small, the integrity and the things that Becky was talking about earlier.
I love that, walking with them through the struggles and not trying to walk them out of them.
Yes.
But man, is that hard.
It is.
Very hard.
Nobody
Very hard.
wants to see their kids suffering or in pain, physically or mentally, obviously. But but you start to realize the more and more you walk them out of it, the less their character is looking like the path you had hoped it would be going down, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. Well, do y'all have any other thoughts or advice for us? Becky's pointing at Bryant. He always has stuff.
Well, I think that the main takeaways that we would like to give people is, the reality of, as Christians, you should keep God number one in your life, and then your marriage, and maybe you're not married but are married, but that should be secondary, and then your children, and you try. In parts of your life, those will kind of get out of whack, but you always want to try and keep them on that guideline, and with God being number one, and communicating with God on a frequent basis will help you be able to communicate with your wife and your children in the long run, and to realize that that God's given them to you as a gift, so He knows how to raise them the best, and that you need to ask Him for that wisdom so that you can do that. And sometimes that is not just communicating with God only, but asking people that that are strong Christians, and maybe that they have children that are grown, because people, I think so many times now they don't want to talk one-on-one with people, but that's where you're going to find your best answers. And so be willing and open to not be afraid to ask people for help.
I would add one last encouragement that you're not your child's parent on accident.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just a random happenstance. That's better. It's on purpose, and God didn't go, well, I guess I'll put you with that one.
Right.
It was very intentional.
Absolutely.
And we can be intentional and loving and nurturing and guiding these amazing little people. Well, thank you guys both so much. It was fantastic to talk with you. And thanks for sharing a little bit of your wisdom with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aren't you so grateful that you're not alone in the challenges and wonderful messiness of raising kids? I hope you're reminded that the hard work and the heart and the effort you're investing in your family now is so worth it, and you're doing a great job. I loved hearing Bryant and Becky's passion for building trust with their kids and how they set clear expectations so that they could be formed and shaped into the people they were created to be. Like Misty said, the key theme throughout this whole conversation was just about being intentional right where you're at. No parent is perfect, and there's grace to begin again each day. Well, thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to share these authentic conversations with you about everyday topics. There are a couple of episodes left to share for the year, and we want to hear your feedback about the series as a whole. So send us your thoughts, your suggestions, questions, whatever you've got to podcast@faithcommunity.co. We'd love to hear what you think as we wrap up this year. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day and be on the lookout for the next episode as we continue to discover what matters most.